with this very volatile landscape that I've just described in the previous lesson, with the farmers agitating and there being a lot of unrest because of economic conditions, we really ought to examine now um, who's running the state from 1880 to 1900. Well, the short answer is Democrats. Democrats run Texas. Well, what do Democrats stand for in the late 19th century? Well, in Texas, they stand for government retrenchment, meaning we're going to reorganize the government and essentially try to dismantle some of the stuff that had happened because of Reconstruction. They believed in white supremacy, that there are different races, but the white race should be given all due deference. They believed in states' rights on issues of race and a host of other issues. Uh, Texas Democrats also believed that nationally there should be very low tariffs. Essentially, they were leaning towards free trade. And then they also believed that perhaps the role of the federal government might include funding railroads, certainly frontier defense, and river and harbor development, but very little else. Well, there is an opposition party. It's called the Republican Party, just like today. The Republicans were, in fact, the main party of opposition, but it was a coalition group, to be sure, composed mostly of blacks, former Unionists, sheep raisers, oddly enough, because the sheep raisers and the cow raisers didn't get on, so the sheep raisers fell in with the Republicans. Some merchants, and some commercial interest. So folks that are buying and trading, and other folks that have been sort of disaffected or disenfranchised by the Democrats. What they stood for, the Republicans of the late 19th century in Texas, they stood for the expansion of civil rights, the improvement of education, economic development, and ultimately they fell behind two leaders, E.J. Davis, the former governor, and Elisha M. Pease. Well, the end of the 1870s, the Republicans have been eclipsed. This is really the era of Richard Koch. Richard Koch knocks off Davis and is reelected by 75% of the voters in 1876, which effectively ends and then rolls back Reconstruction in Texas. Koch also shepherded the process of recrafting the state constitution in 1876, which is the constitution that we all abide by now. There's a nomination fight 2 years later between Richard B. Hubbard and J.W. Throckmorton for the leadership of the Democratic Party in Texas, and the compromise is Orrin M. Roberts. Orrin M. Roberts becomes governor. Well, what's interesting about this election is that the Greenback Party, fueled in part by agrarian unrest and assisted by Republicans, comes very close to upsetting the Democratic control over the state. In the 1880s, Orrin M. Roberts is succeeded by John Ireland in 1882. Most of the congressional delegation during this time period are Democrats. In fact, there's only one non-Democrat that goes to Washington from Texas. And the major concerns that Texans are putting before their national forum up in Congress have to do with fence cutting and land prices, somehow addressing how land prices can be controlled and land made available for additional sale. Lawrence Sullivan Ross is elected in 1886, and it's that year that Texas gets its new, very grandiose pink granite Capitol that you can visit to this very day. After Lawrence Sullivan Ross, you have a number of other governors that lead the state, but nationally, Texans are really starting to play a very prominent role. Some of the more important Texans in Congress include John H. Reagan and Roger Q. Mills, both former Confederates. The 1890s can be best described as the Jim Hogg era. He's elected in 1890 with promise of a more active state government. Primarily, he's reacting to the farmers' unrest. Texans like their government limited and not very interventionist. But Jim Hogg says, we're going to have to do something or these farmers are going to get their pitchforks and get after us. He's reelected in a fairly hotly contested election in 1892. But what Jim Hogg really stands for is this sort of bridge period between the old Democratic regime that ended Reconstruction and brought Texas back into sort of a Democratic status quo and the sort of firebrand and fiery populist revolt that's about to break out.